So our last speaker in this session is Dr. Ellis Parry. So Ellis is I think, I was going to say unique, but we kind of had an engineer earlier, or somebody linked to it, an engineer by background, but will be speaking to us this morning about from hospital to home, co-developing neumind to support long-term neurorehabilitation. Thanks, Ellis.
Cool. So, yeah, thanks, Jess. Real pleasure to be talking to you all today. So, yeah, Doctor of Engineering. I usually, well, sometimes including emails if I want to get a response from other doctors, but yeah, just saying that up front in case I get found out. So, yeah, I'll begin by showing you some lovely pictures of me and my brother. So this is my identical twin brother, Luke. Not sure who's who here. I think probably the one with the flat cap, feet slightly bigger, so probably that one. And I think he's the one with the beat-up face, because I was much faster playing rugby. And just a little twin story, because I think you guys will find it interesting. But when we think back on our memories, I would say up to the age of maybe 7, it's almost impossible to... We used to argue whose memory was who. So this was Rock, and that was our favourite WWE wrestler. And we would always argue about who had the Rock pajamas, and it was like this ongoing argument. But we would fabricate these quite I'm still convinced it's mine, and he's, yeah, I'll share more. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they're mine. But yeah, we would fabricate these complex memories and stories. And another little story here is couldn't read each other's minds, but on a school trip to the Cadbury factory, so at the end there's a gift shop, it's maybe 10,000 different sweets. We were in different groups, and we both got exactly the same Cadbury's rubber and a curly whirly, which our teachers couldn't believe. But yeah, that's you know, growing up as a twin. And whilst we were studying at university, Luke suffered a traumatic brain injury, very serious. He was number 3 on the Glasgow scale. He was in a coma for about 6 months. And I would have loved for, you know, to bring him here to share his own journey, but I'm going to, you know, do a little bit to share on his behalf. And like many, you know, very good acute in and outpatient. As Alan was talking about earlier, you know, you could definitely do more, definitely in that early phase. But where I see it as a kind of external looking in, where some of the really, really big challenges, so you get those basic needs covered, but then that discharge into the community it's huge breakdown in communication, in knowledge, and often, I'll come to this in a bit, you know, the needs of the individual change, and that's rarely considered. If you're just looking at, you know, these outcome measures which don't really take into account the stage of someone's life, you lose out on a lot of potential value there. So yeah, almost non-existent community support, and then life, and you know, that is really where we always talk about, you know, rehabilitation recovery, but when you're talking about neurological injury, you're talking about someone's life has now changed, and it's about helping them find, you know, their purpose and fulfillment in that context, and not talking about, you know, your impairments and getting better. It's talking about them as an individual where they are, and that is so important. And you've got to figure it out yourself. It would be great if there was more help, but it's ultimately a journey that that individual has to walk on their own. So for my brother, you know, just to give you an idea of the timeframes here, for a serious traumatic brain injury, the timeframes are massive. You know, the inpatient, outpatient community, and then life is, it's all, and when we look back at where he made major kind of life, you know, points, life goals, it was kind of all, I would say, well, I'll go through these a little bit, you know, the relearning it in the life afterwards. So this is him now. He's, as you can see, a lot more vibrant and, you know, love for life than I do. Better hairline as well. But this is 13 years later, and this is when he's now, you know, went on his first date. He's currently talking in a school, getting his first, you know, part-time paid job. These are all stacked in the last year or two, and it's very easy, I think, for clinicians to be focused on your interaction with that patient, and then a lot of the work that you guys do, you're preparing that individual to then maybe a decade later be able to live a life that they want. And so that journey, this is a bit of digital art that my brother did, and he would, if he was here, he would be reading a bit of a poem. I'm not going to do that, don't worry. But it's very good. I wouldn't do it justice, that's why, not for any other reason. But yeah, it's a long road to recovery. So just to lead into what we're doing now, just summarize some of the challenges. And I wanted to go really from the patient perspective, but also the caregiver perspective, because that's where I feel I can add the most in a conference like this. So these are really kind of obvious, but there's huge gaps in care and the long-term support. And that is mostly, I would say, it's psychological. You could say, maybe compensating, but it's really, gearing that person up. Maybe it's going back into work, maybe it's going back into education, whatever it is. And that is just really, really difficult to access from statutory services. The continuity through transitions, there's been recommendations on rehab prescriptions and other means, but when you're dealing with a collaborative MDT team, and then this person is, and I think Alan showed the care pathway, which I think is actually a simplified pathway. This person is going to interact with many, many individuals, services, and they all hold the data themselves, and it's just crazy. I did experience kind of systems engineering and this kind of stuff, and when you look at it, it's just it's ridiculous in my opinion. And yeah, this also, these are nice guidelines. And I'll just give an example. When we work with patients, most of them don't know, their goals, their rehab goals. It's meant to be everything that's meant to be based on that, or a formulation which you guys use a lot, which I think is brilliant. They don't know that. The support workers don't know that. The family don't know it. Where is it? It might be in a massive ring binder. And there's a really low-hanging fruit around that, where it was just so frustrating as an individual and family member there. So after doing my PhD, I wanted to get into this space, and my brother, and a lot of the benefits he's now getting was he went to Oliver Zangwill Centre, which is a fantastic neuropsychological-led rehab centre. It was about 4 years after his injury that he went. It was transformative, and when he was there, he was using this NeuroPage, and this is for any young people here, this is like a little buzzer that you'd wear on your belt. I think maybe it's in like one of the doctor shows or something. I think maybe doctors use it. I don't know. But anyway, it was super old-fashioned, outdated, but it was also really surprisingly powerful. It would be a little nudge, and what I found was most useful was when Luke was at home. It would help reinforce concepts and maybe therapy tasks, but also practical things like medication at home, and reinforce everything he was doing in the centre. So we took that, and the first thing we did was just put it into app. Pretty kind of simple. Luke called it Alfred after the butler, Batman's butler, and it was really good at like nagging people, but in quite a nice way, because you didn't have to nag them; it would be done by the phone. And I did like some simple things around everyone can nag. I'll call it nagging as a joke, but yeah, everyone can develop these. So it's not just the clinician or the individual; it might be other people involved in the care. And it started like being. The promise was that better coordination and visibility of what's going on. So we did that. We had about overall maybe 1,000 or 2 users, and we learned a lot. And also we were just getting into this space, didn't realize how challenging it would be, the lack of funding, like the different ways, no outcome measures, loads of barriers. But this is now looking back a few years, some of the main lessons that we had. It's really around that, like, the guidance is only as good as when it's delivered and if it's understood. And this can be done really, really effectively. But, like, yeah, if you're doing an in-person session with a patient, you must remember, like, that person is probably not going to remember anything you're talking about, or not be in an emotional state to action it, and is giving it in a letter, or email or ring binder, is that going to be the best way that that's going to be impactful? Because it can be. And this just, we had a lot of user data, and when you start exploring that, it's very interesting. So 8 times, we call them smart prompts, and Alfred, 8 times more usage, if you like, use of these prompts when simply there was a professional involved in the care circle, even if they didn't necessarily contribute that much. And then these things kind of spiral as well. So in contribution by a clinician, those prompts, rather than just being really simple, like medication, wake up, they start involving strategies and being a bit more personalized. And that accountability as well led to a lot more usage and value. So another one, a digital recall, I think this is a really important point that gets lost somewhere, but it's very intuitive if you've lived with someone like this. If you're not supporting these kind of more foundational impairments, then how are you going to expect to move someone up? They have to understand, they have to embed it, they have to start actioning some of these things that you're talking about. And if you're not adequately supporting those bottom pieces, it just makes it way more difficult. So the person will require more sessions, more rehab, and ultimately there's not the funding or the resources to do that. And so start from a bottom-up approach of delivering all your care with that in mind, and would be a really good step towards progress. And designing for engagement. So I think this sector, in the TBI, the use of technology is massively underutilized in this regard. And a lot of these, the therapy tasks, the strategies, can be done better. So this is an example, turning a spaced retrieval exercise to, don't actually take that phone number away because I think it's Andrew Bateman's. You could maybe say hi, but just turning that into, on a phone. And when you start doing this, you can also capture a lot more data that can be used to further personalize, which is impossible through the paper-based methods. I don't know how long I've got. Okay, got plenty of time. Great. And some other drivers, which are just general ones here, is the personalization. There's been recent developments in technology which allow that we can start doing this in a much more feasible approach. But where does that come from? It can come from the individual, obviously, but also the people who know them best. And we were sitting in some MDT teams with Mike Dilley, actually. I know it was amazing the context that they bring in to an effective MDT team meeting before they see a patient. But getting all that information from the different sources is a real challenge. And in statutory services, we don't have some of these resources. How can you better use that? And a lot of it is by involving those nearest and dearest and bringing them in on the journey, rather than just as an add-on, which often is done purely, I think, we all realize the importance, but because of the resource limitations. So we kind of tried to take a lot of this, and we were working at this point with Glasgow Uni, and to bring that clinical element when we kind of had the technology, the experiential. And following this is, I like to bring in these cycles, because when you read research papers and they talk about how to iterate and develop, and it never ever aligns with the reality of what doing studies is, which is really long, expensive studies, and then you learn all the things that you would love to implement, but you then have to do another study, and it would take even longer. By that time, the technology's completely changed. So it's a kind of a side point, but we can develop very quickly and agile when we're just working directly with the patients. So we were doing that with our users, and the app from Alfred, it became neumind, which is the name of the startup. We actually got a letter through from we had got sort of rare piece of coverage, I think, in The Guardian randomly. I had no idea. My phone just started buzzing in the morning. And then we got a letter from the Alfred app saying, you've got to change your name. And we were just like a tiny little team of people, couldn't afford legal fees. So we changed to neumind. Still, some of our users call it Alfred, bless him. But yeah, what we developed the app into was to kind of take that simple prompting basis, add a little bit of personalization, which we can do from some simple questions, and both combining that, an onboarding, but what you guys call ecological momentary assessments, or just asking people for information at different points in time, and not just loading it all into a big assessment period. Connecting the care circle, again, maintaining that, providing more tools. And one of the interesting challenges we've always faced is you add another feature, you also add another challenge for someone with impairment to use. So it's always trying to strike a balance between that. Strategies in education, and then community other users. And this was one of the, something which adds a lot of value. If you've gone through neurological injury or condition, you can't relate to, it's almost impossible to relate to it. It's a truly unique experience. And so they've really formed wonderfully supportive and loving communities. And if you can facilitate that, I think patient group care can be really effective if you can help them form those communities. Often, it's really, they might not want to join or be part of that, and it comes at different times in the recovery journey. But yeah, very, very powerful. So that was the app, and then what we started, well, we realized we were doing all this learning and insights and loads of user tests, loads of user data, but we didn't actually have any formal research. So we started looking at producing that through two lenses, if you like. So a bit like a Christopher Nolan movie, we're looking at the client lens on one stream, and another stream clinician lens. And the interplay between the two is critical if you want to get something adopted, but it's also the client will only benefit as much as the input from the clinician when it comes to tools like this. So I'll talk a bit more about that. So we're looking at long-term engagement with the technology. Technology can obviously help people with impairment, but why would they use it long-term? And then integrating that into clinical practice. So first of all, starting with that client perspective, we doing a study. Colleague Matt is currently writing it up, but just to go through quickly, we were looking at much longer term than typically you would look for in these trials. So they were, it was users, 12 adults with ABI. They were self-reporting, I should say, and using the app for 4 months. And then there was an interview, and then there was a check-in afterwards. And we were also supplementing that with rich actual behavioural usage data that we had, and lots of previous interviews for a few, and also more formally structured ones at the 4 and 12 month check-in. And we were looking at that to really pull out the themes that we could use as the developers. We wanted to try and make it as useful as possible, but also understand more generally what are the factors or the barriers here. And I'll just go through a few of the key themes here. So these were the core themes. And the introduction, ease of use, that was a huge one that we didn't really foresee. Like some of these, you can kind of, they're obvious, but when it was introduced in a rehab journey, and how it was introduced was absolutely critical to whether someone's going to be using and getting value from something even a year after. And it was very common for people to say things like, oh, I don't want to use technology because I don't want to lose the function of my brain. And then I'm there like, if I didn't use technology, I'd be absolutely screwed. Like you should definitely, but these were impressions that were imprinted early on in their care, and they maintain, and they can be very damaging. So yeah, this is just an example of one. And some of them also is like, if they were using it in a way which was providing real, tangible value to them, then that would just drive continuous use. And often it is, especially later on, it's not completing a therapy task. It's doing something which is really practically beneficial to them. Like this one here, just being able to go out the house with less worry. We could have introduced the app in different ways, and if they weren't going to get that initial value, it would have been discarded. So just making it really tangibly beneficial early on is absolutely critical. Integration into rehabilitation and daily life. So we had 4 users who they weren't engaging with the app at 12 months. Initially. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why, and this is also, I should say, I didn't do this research, so I'm conflating this with about maybe 100 user interviews, so which we can't include in the study. But yeah, what is very, very common is that the stage when it's introduced, it can be introduced in a way, and this is not just our app, this is just any technology, in an incremental and gentle way at the beginning, and then allow them to take more control. And that gentle introduction for any use of technology that they're going to support is really, really important, and it's almost training them to then take lead when you discharge. And the knowledge and the ownership has to be on them and not you, because when they leave, you're not there. So that it's really, really important and often overlooked. And the community and social support, this is, again, is a real driver of general engagement and use. So going now on to what we're doing and still do on the clinician perspective is looking at, okay, we know that this, the introduction is very sensitive, like how it's introduced, very sensitive to the value that will ultimately be taken on by that individual. So how can we better integrate it into rehab? And also just there are many, many benefits to a better use of, more deeply integrated use of technology in rehab, in particular due to its nature. So we worked with the Wolfson outpatient service, their ICAP program, which was perfect for our use because it was intensive compensatory aid training program, and it was fascinating. If anyone wants more kind of come talk to me afterwards for any other insights that I can't don't have time to put in here, but it was 8 weeks long, MDT team, group sessions. They meet 2 or 3 times a week, and then over in between sessions they'll be working on particular focused tasks, homework tasks, or other strategies to then come back in the next week and refine. And it was developed on a personalised basis, so each group would be very different, and they'll just work on what is most important to the group. Very future, I always thought very forward thinking as well, because you're training people to, when they leave, a lot of them will want to go back into work. That's one of the main kind of goals. And if you can't use technology and you're trying to get a job, you're going to really, really struggle. So you're kind of setting people up for the reality of what the world is these days. So what we did, lots of fly-on-the-wall observations of these groups, loads of interviews, and both with the survivors and caregivers, but because we had done a lot of that work before, we were really focused on the clinicians and what the challenges that they have and their perceptions. So the top challenges that we learnt of, and I'll just kind of highlight the main ones here. The time for the clinicians to learn and train and be confident enough to then introduce with a client was really, really, really high. And we did the ICAT, and the VOC Hub was interesting as well, because the VOC Hub was, I would say it was almost 80%, well, maybe 60%, how can I use this technology? Oh, I found this thing that could help me. Could you teach me? And these clinicians were basically found themselves in these tech roles. And that is the nature of the world that we live in these days. So, and they would go and find, we were there when the first ChatGPT models were coming out, for example, and one of them, I found this thing, could this help me? And the clinicians had no idea, and they would go, Ellis. And so I was meant to be flying the wall, like, can you, and yes, it's just very, very common, and you kind of expected to know all these things as well as all the clinical knowledge that you have. The accurate monitoring of tasks and strategies outside of sessions, very, very important to be able to personalize and really, help someone progress. Absolutely critical to make most use of the limited resources you have, and making that really meaningful and like salient to that individual. So, and also, I want to put this in here just as a more kind of practical viewpoint. What we noticed is, as a startup, if we're trying to create a technology to help a patient, if we're not making your jobs easier, then it's not going to be introduced. And I would say it's as strict as that. Having champions is super important, but it also needs to increase the bottom line, and that's, that and making your job easier, I think, is where we'll get, much more use or better integration of technology into rehab. So just very quickly, some of the things that we were looking at trying to improve specifically was what people we speak to is like the ring binder of hell, which is like everything is important and the rehab is just in this like ring binder. It's like a read only, we read once and then sit on a shelf usually. Loads and loads of apps, combining that into one system, which is that person can actually use, and the disconnected support, and that, most of that is around the communication and coordination. And very quickly, before I end with a bit of a video that my brother posted yesterday, actually, we want this to travel with the individual, not the service. So what the app, it is now become part of a connected platform, where we have that as the endpoint for the patient and the caregiver, and a interface for clinicians to try and support the core roles that you have, that you do. And yeah, we've been working with a few services in the last year to really refine this, and now starting to get some really nice, promising signal that this is working. And I'll leave you with this. I'm not an Instagram guy, but Luke, the person who actually took Luke on into this school, she's great. She's very understanding of his challenges, but also how to get the most out of him. And she's kind of helped him tell his story a little bit on Instagram. So yeah, this is a little video that he did yesterday. Yeah, and so he's actually talking in the school right now, which is why he couldn't come. And yeah, you should follow him on Instagram. And yeah, if you want to talk or possibly work together, please shoot me an email. But yeah, thank you, and happy to ask any questions.
Thank you, Ellis, for the great talk. Do we have questions for Ellis?
Thank you for telling us about your very impressive innovation. I was interested to hear a bit about the safeguarding side of things. For example, are the clinicians and clients signing up jointly, and how do you ensure safeguarding, especially with the community aspect of the app, because I'm guessing some of the users could be quite vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, in the earlier days, we took an approach which was, it's risk, as you're looking at the risk reward. We monitor the community, so it's monitored by people, but this is a small scale, and we're able to do that. As we grow, we'll definitely have to consider how to do that in a cost-effective way. But the best way of dealing with that is for it to be introduced by the clinician, because that takes care of whether someone has capacity, they can talk someone through what to expect. So actually, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to focus more on that introduction route, and that was a key reason. If you've got an app on the App Store and anyone could come in and download it, and to test those and to do that adequately is incredibly challenging, and it's just much better done by a clinician, or at least overseen.
Thanks. Really exciting potential with the app. Just wanted to ask two questions. The first is, can you illustrate how it's used for example, for things like apathy, and getting go and sort of getting some sense of order to one's day? And secondly, can it be used for monitoring? And the reason why I ask that is because there's still a problem with the ecological validity of frontal lobe testing. So if we could take an app that might be able to be used day to day for monitoring, and perhaps correlate that with a multitude of executive function tests, we might be able to get, with multi-regression analysis, for instance, a closer understanding as to those questions that are most relevant to real-world functioning of patients with apathy or disinhibition.
Yeah, so we were looking at what's currently done, the strategies that's used, but also so something you might have seen on the screenshot. There's cognitive tools. We try to build digital building blocks that together can make a strategy, and it's still in progress. But the idea of journaling and tracking and asking. So you can, as a clinician, you can create a custom alert for someone, and it will fire. You can either get that to go at a random time, we call it a nudge, or a set time, and you can ask for specific bits of information and wording. So, a classic one might be like a fatigue journal or an awareness journal, and maybe for apathy or emotional regulation, you can walk them through some very personalized questions. That, over time, and then that person can go and reflect back on it as well, and as a clinician you can see that data. I think that could potentially help with that, but really it was looking at what do you currently do, and it probably it's diaries or logs that you're asking someone to do. So if you use the app for something like that, it can be really effective. You can ask things, people can add photos and this kind of thing to make quite a rich resource. So yeah, there's elements of that, and then if you want to try and help someone, act on that, I think a lot of it is trying to make. So I'll use an example of the nudges that I mentioned. It can be just a simple bit of text, but if you make it very emotionally salient for someone, perhaps using that information that you've already collected, or family member or something, then it can be really effective kind of interruption to whatever they're doing, or a note to think in a certain way, or remember, maybe it could be motivational or otherwise. And I think that some of those simple things can be really effective.
Sorry, just one final question. Can you use it on the watch as well, or just on the phone at the moment?
You can. I've got a test account, and I've had about 5 go off whilst on my watch here. I put it on Do Not Disturb. It will go through a notification. So yeah, you won't be able to input from a watch yet, but yeah, you can do it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellis, for that excellent talk and for the questions.